Hello and welcome to the Curriculum Preview, Grade 3 ELAR Unit 2 for the second 6 weeks. I'm Felicia Wilkerson, the ELAR and Social Studies Coordinator. I look forward to working with your team this school year. To frame the lesson today, I will guide you through the heat map and IFD analysis. You will record your thoughts and learning. You will collaborate concerning essential questions to ensure all students learn. And you will use the Content Builder and PLC document to plan for student success. Your learning targets for today, I hope that by the end you can say that you can use the IFD to target instruction for your students. You can understand and model how readers construct meaning through the reading process and provide students with purposeful practice of active reading. Unit 2, Discovering Other Literary Genres, include literary nonfiction, poetry, and drama for this unit. Please take a moment to review the Local Assessment Grade 3 ELAR Blueprint. There are 20 instructional days for this unit. The instructional days are October 6th through November 3rd. The assessment will be posted on October 31st, and the assessment date is November 4th. Unit assessments are expected to be administered within 3 school days upon completion of the unit. Other materials you'll need for this curriculum preview are the IFD for Unit 2, your Content Builder document, and your PLC for the Reading PLC document. Let's take a moment to look at our Grade 3 heat map by standard. Since this unit encompasses poetry, literary nonfiction, and drama, we're going to look at poetry and literary nonfiction everywhere that it appears on the heat map, as well as our across literary standards. We see that poetry 3.6a, the SE, is our hotspot. But notice also 310A, which is an across literary standard at 56 that we definitely want to consider when planning. Our process standards are figure 19D and E, and we see that in poetry 3.6E was at 61%, so we want to help students be able to summarize poetry, and literary nonfiction, when it was tested in 2012 for figure 19E, was at 42%. For figure 19D, we see some growth. 2014, 3.6 figure 19D was at 76%, and literary nonfiction was at 72%. Let's take a moment to look at our knowledge and skill statement for literary nonfiction. So let's go ahead and deconstruct the standard. We see our cognitive levels of expectation are understand, make inferences, and draw conclusions. Our content are the structural patterns and features, and our context is literary nonfiction. Look at the specificity. That's what students will be able to do. This is how we target our instruction. They're making inferences related to the whole literary nonfiction text, part of the literary nonfiction text, structure, and features, and summarized in ways that maintain meaning and logical order. And they need to respond by providing text evidence. The STAR note says that this knowledge and skill statement may be assessed with figure 19D and E, as we've seen on the heat map. Let's review our knowledge and skill statement and our hotspot SE for poetry. We see that our 3 C's for the knowledge and skill statement are understand, make inferences, and draw conclusions. Our content is structure and elements, and our context is poetry. Now, these are the types of inferences students will be able to make. This is how we target our instruction. Notice how it's the same in every knowledge and skill statement. It's the same as it was for literary nonfiction. They're making inferences related to the whole poem, part of the poem, particular techniques used in the poem, and they're providing evidence to support their understanding. This knowledge and skill statement may be assessed with figure 19D and E. Also, 3.10 is make inferences related to sensory language. Now let's look at our hotspot SE, 3.6a. Our 3 C's are our cognitive level of expectation is describe, our content is characteristics and imagery, and in the context of poetry. On your IFD, it gives you possible characteristics of poetry as well as poetry forms. This is what students will be able to describe with their imagery, and this is how we target instruction. For 3.6a, students are required to write poems that convey sensory details using the conventions of poetry. This is what we want students to be able to do. To ensure students learn, we need to focus on question number 1. What do we want students to learn? So after reviewing the IFD, we want students to use a range of comprehension strategies to make complex inferences about the structure and elements of poetry, literary nonfiction, and drama for this unit. How will they learn it? They're going to learn by constructing meaning while they read, by thinking about reading, and thinking while reading. Pause and ponder. How will you provide explicit instruction in the reading process? How will you allow students to practice and show progress in the reading process? Please pause the video at this time to discuss with your team. How do the TEKS address comprehension? Through our metacognitive process, Figure 19, which are our process standards for comprehension skills. We know what we are teaching. We're teaching complex inferences about the elements and structure of the genre. The only thing that changes is the context. So we see that the how is just as important as the what in what we teach. We must teach literary and informational text through the reading process. Figure 19A through F addresses those metacognitive processes, those reading processes that students need in order to think about text. Comprehension is a process that teachers can model for students through an effective lesson framework. Pause and ponder these questions, and then collaborate how this looks in the classroom and share with your group. Let's review our content builder. We first want to start with our hotspot. So we'll always include the knowledge and skill statement along with our SE. So what we want students to learn to do is to make complex inferences and draw conclusions about the structural and elements of poetry and provide evidence from text to support their understanding. Specifically for 3.6a, we want students to describe characteristics of various forms of poetry and how they create imagery. What do students need to do to access learning? They need to be active readers. So we're going to put figure 19A, B, and C here. Now since students are required to be able to describe characteristics of various forms of poetry and how they create imagery, figure 19C is going to be huge here because we want to really hone in on visualization. And also, students should use context to determine the meaning of unknown words. To scaffold learning, you may want to visit 3.10a, where students first identify language that creates a graphic visual experience and locate specific words or phrases from the text that help create images in the reader's mind. And then students can then determine literal and non-literal meaning of the words and phrases before they're able to describe and make those complex inferences. And lastly, we want to consider how can students demonstrate their learning, and that's through figure 19D, E, and F. So understanding the reading process. Reading is a complex, multifaceted process that begins and ends with meaning. It's where the reader draws on both thinking and language strategies inside and outside the text to process text with understanding. These are the characteristics of an effective reader. We need to meet students where they are in their readability. We know what an effective reader does. These are the things we can model for students who need more practice and direct instruction in the reading process so they can become proficient readers. So you may ask, how do I teach readers to construct meaning through the reading process? We can teach readers to construct meaning through the reading process explicitly through modeling and think alouds, supportively with scaffolds and practice and immediate corrective and descriptive feedback. We can teach readers actively by engaging students in thinking, writing, and discussing every day. We can employ graphic organizers to represent concepts and understanding. We can teach readers to construct meaning through the reading process thoughtfully with the application of a variety of assessments that inform our instructional choices, and systematically with gradual release of responsibility. To focus on learning, let's review question 2. How will we know students learned? We're going to know that they've learned by gathering evidence that shows students are able to do the following: monitor or check on their reading, search for information, or correct their reading. This can be done both verbally and written. When students monitor their reading, they're able to construct meaning from words, construct meaning across a variety of texts, and use their background knowledge. When students can successfully search for information, they can use language structures, text structures, and literary elements. And when they're able to correct their meaning, they are monitoring and correcting, solving words, gathering information, predicting, adjusting. They're making connections, inferences. They're able to summarize and critique text. Pause and ponder for a moment. What learning activities would allow you to gather evidence of student learning? Let's review the levels of thinking. Thinking while reading involves checking for your own understanding of what the text says, thinking within the text, and recognizing literary devices and structures. This is important for students to think while reading, but we also need to teach students how to think about their reading. When we think about our reading, we are conscious of our own connections, our own questions, and our own responses to what we've read. We think about the specific strategies we will apply in what we're reading. And we're actually thinking about our thinking. That's metacognition. That's our big thinking. And we're consciously examining and monitoring our own brain's processes. So one instructional approach to developing reading comprehension is to help readers think about their reading strategies while reading. So now for some clarity on what instructional activities to plan. Once we know what our learning targets are and have defined how we will assess them, we're able to think clearly about what combination of instruction and experiences will prepare students both to know and to demonstrate their learning. This is often referred to as intentional teaching, where all instruction and classroom activities are aimed at specific learning targets. How will we know students learn? We must design and choose assessments that serve and match the intended learning outcomes, use various assessment methods, and write and ask assessment questions of all types. And now let's review our PLC for the Reading PLC document. For this unit, we're going to use all types of literary nonfiction, poetry, and drama. Since we're talking about active reading, we're going to use all levels of thinking. And thinking about what our evidence will be that students are using active reading skills and they are able to analyze and make complex inferences about the structure and elements of literary nonfiction, poetry, and drama. They're going to write responses to literature, use graphic organizers, maybe create a skit, perform a skit, a dialogue journal, double entry journal, a dramatic presentation when they're acting out in their drama, or even turning a poem into a dramatic presentation. They may write their own movie script. They can write a letter, text annotation, and reading symbols. The instructional strategies that I chose to share with you today are a think mark, but also they might do short writes before, during, and after reading. They can create concept webs, use graphic organizers. Of course, there may be cooperative learning structures and role play. And of course, every day they're going to read, write, and discuss. So the first strategy I want to share with you today is called Think Mark. Think marks are a tool for students to make quick comments, write questions, or note an interesting phrase or sentence and mark the spot in the book. Now, if you ran off a passage for a passage, they would make their think mark directly on the passage. And then students then bring the think marks to a group discussion. Next, I have a short video for you about poetry workstations.
This great lesson idea is called Poetry Workstations. Today we are going to be focusing on poetry, and we're going to be reflecting on it. We're going to be using inferences, Before going into workstations, I took the students through a process of reviewing what poetry is and what it means, and then actually doing and analyzing a poem with them so that they had a good background and foundation before they went to practice it on their own. Poetry is an imaginative awareness of experience expressed through meaning, sound, and rhythmic language choices so as to evoke an emotional response. This lesson I would use towards the center of a poetry unit where the students have a little bit of background knowledge about poetry. What figurative language do you see in the poem? What figurative language?
When the poem says the road was grassy and it wanted wear, I think that's like personification, because a road can't want something.
Okay.
Because it's not alive unless you think about the grass. So it's just comparing it to what a human might say.
So let's take a look at your workstations that you're going to be doing. To practice using your inferences with poetry, bringing your schema connections, asking questions about what you're reading. The 3 groups and 3 workstations were the iPod workstation, the techie workstation with blogging, and podcasting workstation. In the iPod workstations, I put some poetry in motion videos on there where the students were able to choose the poem to watch, and then they were using their poetry reflection questions and sticky notes to reflect on the poem and analyze and think about what the poem meant to them.
You sort of get to visualize the poem in a different way. Like if you read it, you just read it. But if you actually see it happening, you can hear it, and sometimes hearing poetry, it's more meaningful than just reading it.
When the students were working on their podcast, they had previously done a poet study where they had analyzed a poet, read a bunch of his or her poems, and in this station they were trying to pretend to be this poet or put themselves in the shoes of the poet so that they could create a radio show or an interview or a video podcast or audio podcast, basically sharing their thoughts and reflections about the style of the poet and reflecting on their poetry.
I'm recording the poem, and then I'm gonna talk about how I thought the Robert Frost felt when he wrote this poem, and then we're probably gonna do a radio show.
I'm gonna talk about it and say what some of the analogies and metaphors and stuff. Different people, poems can mean different things to every single person.
In the blogging workstation, the students were able to reflect on a poem. They had a choice between a humorous or serious poem, and they were commenting, once again using their guiding reflection questions, but not only giving their ideas, but once their classmates posted, they could go back and forth in an online discussion asking questions and commenting with each other.
Which words feel important? Say if you were reading a poem about a dolphin. Say if it was a happy poem about dolphins. You would say, this poem made me feel happy, or this was enjoyable because fill in blank.
This lesson was really about giving them an opportunity to practice and analyze. We're going to kind of have a little bit of a reflection discussion just so that you can implement this lesson in your classroom. I'm going to share my lesson plan, my presentation, and resources with you.
Join us next time for Spotlight on Poetry.
Wonderful. Focus on learning question 3. What will we do if students don't learn? There's no magic technique for helping struggling readers and writers. These guiding principles will help you adjust your materials and teaching for individual learners. These principles are based on what research tells us about struggling readers and writers. So number 1, we have to meet students where they are and move them forward. We need to assign them tasks they can accomplish and expect them to perform. We need to engage our low-achieving students. And we need to increase the number of high-quality texts that students know. The more text students encounter, the greater the background they can bring to understanding new text. We also need to increase the time students spend reading. Struggling readers need more time to read, more time with words and stories and essays. We need to give these students every opportunity to practice reading. And we also need to increase the time students spend writing and the kinds of things they write. Struggling writers need more time to write, so free them up to produce a lot of rough drafts. We also need to teach students to use effective strategies in their reading and writing. So demonstrate effective strategies for them and provide extra support to help them eliminate ineffective strategies and adopt the new effective ones. Provide explicit instruction. Explicit instruction is helpful to all students, but you might want to spend a few extra minutes helping struggling students through a dry run. We need to be sure the tasks are within the student's control. That is, we present students with texts they can read with your support, but a few challenges, and write about topics they know and understand. Make sure your directions are clear. Make sure students understand what they are doing, and invite students to practice the directions or ask them to repeat them aloud. Be sure students understand the rationale of each assignment. Explain the goal of each assignment and how it will help them. Invite students to make choices, provide predictability and routine, and use technology to support students. Pause and ponder. What can you do during class to support students who don't learn during the lesson cycle? Pause the video to discuss with your team. How will we enrich those who do learn? We enrich those who do learn through differentiation. We can differentiate the content, that is, adapting what we teach. We can differentiate the process, that is, the sense-making activity. And we can differentiate the products. These help students individually or in groups rethink, use, and extend what they have learned. Products are important not only because they represent your students' extensive understandings and applications, but also because they are the element of curriculum that students can most directly own. I appreciate you so much for joining me in today's curriculum preview, and I look forward to working closely with you this year. When you plan on implementing one of the strategies I shared with you today, please email me, as I would love to see classroom implementation. Or if you have a strategy that you would like to share, contact me and I'd love to come and video you. Lastly, please don't forget to turn in your PLC for the Reading PLC to your campus designee. I'm Felicia Wilkerson, and until next time, bye-bye.